Hello everybody and welcome back for Phase 3 of my DC Cinematic Universe fan fiction. Now just a quick reminder, I'm doing this merely as a fan of the content and I just simply have too much time on my hands to think about anything else. So I hope you like what my brain comes up with because to be honest, I have, again, way too much time on my hands. Now, if you haven't seen my other two phases, I highly suggest watching those two as this phase builds off of that and leads into my phase 4. So I would highly suggest clicking away, watching those first two videos, and then coming back to this one. So thanks for the watch time. I wanted to make one quick change. There's been other changes, but one relevant change from phase 2 is that I would simply swap release dates between Shazam and Aquaman 2. I want to have Aquaman 2 come out a little bit sooner, so that way there's a little bit more buffer between that and when we get to Aquaman 3 in this phase. Now, without wasting any more time, let's go ahead and jump right in to phase 3. So my first project in phase 3 is going to be Martian Manhunter. Growing up on Mars, we're going to see Jean and Ma'alefa'ak really grow up together for the good portion of the beginning of the movie, and then they're really going to grow up into becoming cops or political leaders or someone of high importance in sort of a benevolent society. Now the plot really kicks off as now living in this, again, benevolent society, and Mars being as great as it is, Brainiac's going to come in and want to take a piece of Mars. He wants to have part of it for his collection because it has become so great. Mars is given a warning by Brainiac and is reminded about his 100% perfect record when he comes in to claim part of a planet. And the Martians really panic, to say the least. And Ma'alefa'ak has the most outlandish plan out there, kind of a la Thanos with Titan, and that is if we destroy the city, then it's no longer desirable, and then we can just up and leave and try to build a new society somewhere else, or just rebuild. None of the other Martians like this idea because they've spent all this time trying to build this up. They'd rather go to war and fight Brainiac for this rather than sacrifice it all for what may or may not work in the first place. So for this, Ma'alefa'ak is really put into Martian prison. Now, skipping ahead in the story, Ma'alefa'ak is able to escape from this prison and just enacts his plan on his own. And he starts setting buildings ablaze. He starts causing a bunch of domestic terrorism and tries to destroy as much of the city as possible for the hopes of it to be as unvaluable, is that the right word? Unvaluable for Brainiac. Now, caught in the crossfire happens to be Jean's wife and daughter, Mira and Kim, and they unfortunately perish in the fires set ablaze by Ma'alefa'ak. Now, once Jean finds his wife and daughter's burned corpses, he just starts breaking down in front of them. Ma'alefa'ak comes in and tries to reconcile with Jean, then say that we can rebuild. Brainiac's definitely not going to want to have their city anymore. He's not going to be collecting them. Now this is when we'd have our big emotional fight between Jean and Ma'alefa'ak, which is only broken up when Brainiac finally arrives to the planet to try to take the city, only to realize that it's all destroyed. And his once perfect record now has a single blemish, as he cannot take a city that is destroyed. Jean and Ma'alefa'ak lose each other in this carnage and decide to look for other planets. Jean goes off and eventually, of course, finds Earth, and I'd say he lands sometime in the late 40s. Definitely well before the space race and the events of Man of Steel. Now, in the post-credit scene for Martian Manhunter, I would have there be some sort of montage-like sequence showing Jean go from his landing to showing all his different lives. Whenever he'd kind of get to the point where he's kind of living a little too long, he'd move somewhere else and start over with a new life and rinse and repeat until we find him as the reporter at the end of Justice League 2, and he would eventually, similar to the events of the end of the Snyder Cut, talk to Batman, talk to Wonder Woman, talk to Superman, and he would be admitted into the Justice League. Moving into my next project, I have my Wonder Woman 3, subtitled Love and Betrayal. And just so you know, I did not use Thor Love and Thunder as inspiration for this title. I actually happen to have written this whole little fake movie well before Thor 4 was even announced. So do with that what you will. The movie would begin with an ancient retelling of a story between Circe, Hecate, and the Themysciran goddess, Wonder Woman's mother, Hippolyta. Towards the end of this fight scene, of this dramatic battle, you're going to have Circe do this spell where she's going to transform into an alternate version of herself to save herself. Now, this costs her her memories and part of her personality, and would only regain that part of her life when one of Amazonian blood would strike her. Now, moving into the present day, we pick up with Wonder Woman defending the Justice League in cases with confusion between the Justice League and the crime syndicates during the fallout of Justice League 2. Now, with Diana, she's going to have a very, very special lawyer named Donna Milton defending their case. Over the course of the movie, these two are going to become very, very close friends, kind of similar to what you see with Cheetah and Diana in Wonder Woman 1984, except it's going to be a lot more naturally done rather than the forced way that Wonder Woman 84 kind of had that relationship. Eventually, the case is going to be won in favor of the Justice League, with definitive proof that the Crime Syndicate and the Justice League were indeed two different teams, having video evidence of seeing everybody in the room at the exact same time, proving that, well, they are indeed different people. But angry mobs are not happy, and they start to storm the courthouse. When this happens, Diana pushes Donna back to try and defend her. Of course, doing this, I'm sure you've all figured out by now, but Donna is Circe. And this starts flooding all her memories, as this counts as a strike against her from one of Amazonian blood. Of course, Diana had no clue. Technically, neither did Donna. Now, seeing Donna writhe in pain on the courthouse steps, Diana takes her to a nearby hospital and is able to get her the care that she needs. Unfortunately, right after doing this, Diana needs to get out of there as well to continue some hero work. Now, while in the hospital, Donna/Circe starts coming to terms with these new memories that are flooding into her and starts remembering her old life and her old motivations and aspirations, and decides to leave Donna behind in favor of her dominant Circe personality. Now, vowing to finish the work that she has started, she discovers that this is going to involve taking the power of that of the moon goddess, who not only shares that with the name of Hecate, but also that of Diana. Now, because of this, Circe is going to have to do battle with Diana to ensure that the power would be given to her and not Diana. Now, Diana's obviously going to have a problem with this because this is her friend. She still knows that Donna is somehow still inside of this dual personality type situation going on between Donna/Circe. And so Diana's plan eventually boils down to finding a way where she can imprison Circe safely, but not kill her. The solution where she has to go into the past, talk with her mother, meet with Hippolyta, and talk about what it is that she can do, researching, and she eventually finds out that there is a way that she can defeat Circe without killing her. The solution is to banish Circe to the planet Sorka, which is a planet in a distant galaxy that siphons the magic from its inhabitants. So Circe/Donna could live there and not cause anybody any harm, and Earth will be saved. So the next movie is going to be Aquaman 3. And this movie is going to open up with kind of a little montage of Mera and her twin sister Hela both growing up. The two would get along pretty well throughout their childhood. However, Hela would start to develop a bit more aggressive and become a bit more, well, she'd cause a lot of problems. Mera tended to be a bit more authoritarian and try to turn her in, tattle on her to her parents or any sort of law enforcement, but after a while, Hela eventually just ran away. We continue with a 15-year-old Jackson Hyde who is just about to start high school and is excited because he'll be joining school again with his best friend Kenny, who is 1 year older than him. And Kenny also happens to be a secret boyfriend. Now, although Jackson's mother knows that Jackson is homosexual, the rest of the community in their small town outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, do not know about this. Now, the two leave town and go on a fun trip to the San Diego Zoo, which Jackson's mom is very, very hesitant and doesn't want Jackson to go for reasons that she doesn't elaborate on. But Jackson and Kenny end up going out anyways on a fun trip for the two of them. Jackson takes this as an opportunity to show Kenny his powers, as Kenny has never known about Jackson's secret that he has powers similar to that of Aquaman. When Kenny sees these powers, he is shocked and just runs away. Jackson, confused, follows him, but is also now shocked when he notices that Kenny is standing just outside a window on the pier in a weird trance-like state. Jackson's shock increases when he finds that Kenny, amongst a bunch of other people, slowly start walking towards the edge of the pier and jump into the water without a second thought. Jackson, in shock of what has just happened between Kenny running away and suddenly just jumping off the pier with a bunch of other people, looks out into the water and only finds one body, that of a female far off into the distance who submerges herself and proceeds to shoot herself off into the water. Jackson jumps into the water and tries to follow this mysterious woman, but he cannot find her. This is when he stumbles upon Aquaman battling King Shark, his hero that he's looked up to, and he gets to watch him battle one of his biggest villains. Once King Shark is defeated, Aquaman starts taking him back to Atlantis, and Jackson slowly and silently follows Arthur back into the city. It isn't until Arthur officially puts Nanaue, King Shark, back into his prison that he notices Jackson was following him. Jackson explains what happened to him and Kenny and that he wants to find the woman responsible and bring her to justice, and also see if his friend is still alive. Mira and Volko eventually enter the scene and decide against Arthur's wishes to keep Jackson around, as clearly he's part Atlantean as he's breathing underwater, and he's clearly distressed and needs help. Jackson re-explains everything that happened between him and Kenny and everyone at the pier, and they discover that she is likely a siren, she being the mysterious woman, a very old and thought to be extinct member of Greek mythology. Going down the thought of Greek mythology, they first think to contact Wonder Woman, and they go to Oracle, as she is kind of this operator, so to speak, of connecting Justice League members to one another. And Wonder Woman, unfortunately, is busy, as this movie takes place around the same time as Wonder Woman 3, and Wonder Woman is in these court meetings, so she's unavailable. Arthur then says, all right, then give me a hold of Bruce, because Bruce has studied practically everything there is to know about anything, and he can also help us out. But Bruce is busy on patrol and isn't taking any calls. Eventually, going down this short list, Arthur eventually settles for Shazam. And Shazam is very free because no one ever contacts him for any sort of help or advice because, well, Billy Batson's only like 16 years old. And here would be just a great opportunity to get some fun banter between Billy and Arthur, just because their personalities would not mesh very well. But, I mean, for the sake of comedy, it's too good not to pass up. After calming Billy down and getting him focused, he eventually explains that Arthur, Mira, Volko, and Jackson are going to need earplugs, and they cannot hear her song, as it's going to be very enticing and no one's going to be able to resist it because it's just how sirens work. Arthur quickly decides to leave Jackson behind, as this mission is far too dangerous for somebody who has no experience fighting, and Volko would then ask Jackson if he would like to be trained. It is here where Volko, not Damian Wayne Robin like in the comics, that Jackson would receive his water bearer, or his little backpack where he pulls out two hilts and he gets his water swords. And then as Jackson and Volko go off to train, Mira tries to convince Arthur to take him on as his protege. As Arthur and Mira begin to go off and try to find Siren, they suddenly hear her song, and they haven't had a chance to get earplugs yet, and everyone in Atlantis is subject to her song as they all begin to rise up towards the air. This is completely reversing the sort of sirens popping their head out of the water, singing and pulling people off of the boats or anything like that, like in Greek mythology. And this time, Siren is putting her head basically into the water and pulling all of the Atlanteans to the air, where anyone not of royal blood is going to drown in the oxygen. Arthur and Mera quickly collect themselves, and everybody, of course, of royal blood is genuinely fine, and a lot of the Atlanteans are able to get back into the water in time, but not all of them. Some of them do end up drowning in the oxygen. But Arthur and Mera know that she wouldn't have been able to kill everybody, so she really just needed the city cleared for something. This is to break Black Manta out of prison. It's here we learn that Siren's motivation is that she is a Zebellian extremist and Black Manta's lover, and that not only is she looking to break Manta out of prison to save her lover, she's also looking to send a message to her sister and her new husband, Arthur. Now, Jax and Volko are still in Atlantis, as the training center, for safety reasons, is actually soundproofed. And so they couldn't hear the song and are the only two people left in Atlantis. And is here where the two teams, Manta, Siren, Jackson, and Volko, would run into each other and have themselves a little fight. Jackson would take on Black Manta, whereas Siren would take on Volko. Now, in the battle between Manta and Jackson, Manta is going to actually notice that there is a specific birthmark on Jackson's hand. And this isn't the tattoos on his arms. He would have those, but this would be a separate thing. And Manta is going to recognize this birthmark as he has one as well. This is where he finds out that Jackson is actually his biological son. And this is where Manta is actually going to take the upper hand against him and knock out Jackson. Then, between a 2v1 between Siren, Manta versus Volko, it's just too much for him, and Siren is able to kill Volko. Now, just as this is all happening, Arthur and Mera are making their way back to Atlantis at record speeds and are just an eye shot to watch Volko get stabbed. And it is here that we have the two duos, the Arthur and Mera and Siren and Manta, cross paths, and the concern for their friend, Arthur and Mera's friend, Volko, outweighs their hatred for their enemies, and they go to rush and try to save Volko for what time they have left, and let Manta and Siren get away. Making their way down to Volko, they find that he's holding on to his last few seconds of life, and it's here with Volko's dying breath that he asks Arthur to train Jackson, as he's a very talented fighter. Now, as Volko passes on and Jackson wakes up, the remaining team members, being Arthur, Mera, and Jackson, begin the planning their battle against Hela and Manta, and this includes getting earplugs. While in this climactic battle, Mera and Siren would face off 1v1, whereas Arthur and Jackson would take on Manta 2v1. And in this fight, we'd see some glimpses of Jackson's future potential with his water bearer, as he starts showing off a bit of the training that Volko had shown him. As Siren starts to take the upper hand over Mera, Arthur tells Jackson to go and help, as he can take on Manta for the moment. Arthur does eventually disable Manta's suit, and Manta, through his sheer hatred of Aquaman, decides to fire one last blast, and doing so through a disabled suit and a damaged suit causes his suit to break and his mask to crack, and under the pressure of the deep sea, this causes his suit to essentially implode, and water starts seeping into his suit, and he very quickly dies, and his body slowly starts sinking towards the ocean floor, where he is going to lay for the rest of time. And it was in this fight between Arthur and Manta that one of Arthur's earplugs got a bit loose. And Hela, in her shock of watching her lover sink to the ocean floor lifeless, begins to use her song, and Arthur is now subject to her control. Now, under the control of Siren, Arthur is just going to start attacking Mera, and this is only stopped when a watery blade passes through Siren's heart from behind, and we find out that Jackson put an end to her madness once and for all. And as Siren finally dies, Mera looks and genuinely wishes that things between her and her sister would have turned out better. However, she is relieved to know that Arthur is safe, Jackson is safe, and Atlantis will be safe for the foreseeable future. At the end of the movie, we find Jackson going back to his home in New Mexico with Arthur and Mira, and he ends up talking to his mother about how he wants to use his powers to help people. She feels a mixture of pride and relief in knowing that her son is okay and that he's going to be using his powers for good. And Jackson has one more question for her. If Manta was truly my father, then where do my abilities come from? It is here that she reveals that she is also that of Atlantean heritage, and that she herself does have abilities too. When she was a young girl, she ended up falling in love with a younger Black Manta, and the Atlanteans did not approve of this mixed love, and she decided to run away from Atlantis and live with Manta. Now, after Manta unknowingly got her pregnant, he eventually left, and she was left to raise the child on her own, of course, this being Jackson. Out of fear and shame of returning to her people, she decided to move somewhere far away from any oceans in Albuquerque and focus on raising her son. They then grieve over the loss of Kenny, and Jackson says a goodbye to his mother and promises to visit often as he goes off with Arthur and Mira to train and become a hero in his own right. The movie ends with Arthur, Mira, and Jackson giving Vulko a proper funeral. The next movie in this series is going to be Flash 3. The movie opens with seeing a future Earth society, and we watch as a young Eobard Thawne grows up in this future Earth society. He looks at past heroes of old and legends of the Justice League and Justice League Society, Titans, all of the teams. And he likes two heroes in particular, the Flashes, Barry Allen and Wally West. He is beaten up and bullied by many of his peers, and eventually grows up and graduates college with a degree in biochemistry. Through his rough upbringing, he has a hard time of creating any amount of happiness for himself, and has grown up to be pretty bitter. In a last-ditch attempt to create any amount of purpose in his life, he artificially and purposefully recreates the event that caused Barry Allen and Wally West to get their powers. And when he wakes up, he believes he has tapped into the Speed Force. In reality, because of the artificiality, he has tapped into the negative Speed Force. With his new abilities, he attempts to become a new generation of a speedster hero. However, because of his bitter upbringing, he tends to kill his victims rather than just throwing them into jail. While hiding from the authorities after one of his missions, he eventually goes back into the Flash Museum and starts looking at old research done by Barry and Wally, mostly Barry. He finds that Barry was indeed looking at an idea for time travel, and he starts to decode and starts to decipher and analyze what Barry was researching, and his conclusion was Barry just couldn't go fast enough. He couldn't get close enough to the speed of light to start to time travel. To get around this, Eobard constructs a compound that, if consumed by a speedster, will grant them temporarily enhanced super speed on top of their normal super speed, and have them go fast enough to approach the speed of light and time travel. This will later be known as Velocity 9. We then pick up in present time, and we're introduced to Barry fighting off a fun villain, say Trickster or Weather Wizard or Copperhead. And it's just a fun intro level fight that we see a lot of times in comic book movies. He casually defeats the villain, locks him up, and is running late for a hearing for his father. He eventually makes it in time and meets up with Wally and Iris is visibly pregnant and engaged to Barry. While sitting in the trial, Barry gets the thought and the idea of time travel being possible, and this is done by a attorney or a judge making a passing comment about Henry Allen, Barry's father, being able to go back in time and changing what happened. Barry starts going crazy with the idea and starts getting obsessed with the idea of time travel and being able to go back and save his mom, his dad, and his own childhood. And while making theories and running a lot of tests, Wally and Iris try to convince him that if he were to go back, he would change a lot of what is happening in his life. A lot of good things that are happening amidst these, bad beats, to say the least, for lack of a better term. And with this, Barry slowly starts to calm down and slows his roll and begins to agree with them. Shortly after this, a man weirdly starts phasing into their room. This is Eobard Thawne, picking up from the introduction. Thawne introduces himself as a speedster from the future, conveniently leaving out parts about the murder, and becomes living proof to Barry after a couple of tests to prove that he is indeed from the future, that time travel is practically possible. Thawne explains that it wasn't easy and he needed a supplement to be able to go fast enough to approach the speed of light and begin to time travel. This is that compound that he makes called Velocity 9. Thawne offers some to Barry and try to get him to time travel to come and see the future, but Barry rejects this idea as a fulfillment to the promise that he gave to Wally and Iris earlier, that he is just done with time travel. So Wally, Barry, and Eobard go out for some training, as Eobard is a bit inexperienced and is wanting to be trained by the two greats, Barry and Wally. So while on these missions, their ideologies and philosophies begin to really clash, and this happens through the majority of the second act of the movie. The second act is capped off when Eobard intentionally kills one of Barry's villains, say Trickster, and this of course sends Barry and Wally through a spiral, as that is not the way they do things. And as we approach the climax, Thawne takes some Velocity 9 and, to show the true power of speedsters, races off and back in time, and this forces Barry and Wally to take some as well to try to stop him. Of course, as this all happens, Iris's water breaks. Barry and Wally go back in time and find out that Eobard is the one that did kill Barry's mother all those years ago. And in his mother's final moments, Barry cradles her and gives her one last goodbye again before the two catches up to the present, as Eobard, after killing his mother, says that his work is not finished. When they return to the present, they find that Eobard is doing something similar to Iris while she is going through labor. Barry and Wally's protective familial instincts start kicking in, and the two begin to run a vortex around Eobard. Slowly, piece by piece, Eobard is broken apart and torn into complete shreds through the Speed Force. However, after Eobard is defeated, the time is still of the essence, and Barry and Wally quickly get Iris safely to a hospital where she eventually gives birth to Bartholomew Allen Jr. Bart Allen eventually would become Impulse. Now, in the post-credit scene for Flash 3, I don't have any specific details on how it would go, but it would be proving that Thawne isn't killed, but he's in fact just been absorbed by the Speed Force and is biding his time and finding a way to return one day in the future. Now, the next project is one of my favorites in the entire universe, Hellblazer. The movie opens up with a brief history of magic and how it ends up getting to Earth. And then we also get a brief history of the Lords of Order, Hecate, the Upside Down Man, and even a version of Dr. Fate. This leads into how magic is studied by the Cult of the Cold Flame, which is a cult-like society that is led by a man named Nick Necro, and we pick up with a version of John Constantine and Zatanna Zatara in their late teens studying under Necro in the Cult of the Cold Flame. Constantine and Zatanna are seen as two of the best students to ever go through the program, and Zatanna is inspired by the stories of Hecate/the Crone. The Crone is just an evil name for the evil version of Hecate. They're two sides of the same coin, and one's good, one's bad. And Constantine is just a very, very powerful occultist and magic user in the Cult of the Cold Flame. We'd get a brief history of how each of them got there, met, and started falling in love in their late teens. And then the cult is broken up, which leaves Zatanna and John Constantine to start fending for themselves. And they eventually split up because of Constantine's stubbornness, which eventually leads him down to drinking and heavy drug use. Whereas Zatanna goes off and joins the circus, using her magic to entertain people. Years later, the Crone eventually attacks Nick Necro, and in his dying words, he sends a message out to Zatanna, since she is the one who studied the Crone and the Upside Down Man and all of those myths. Knowing she's going to need help with this, she immediately goes and tries to find John Constantine, who is heavily inebriated, to say the least. Through the next quarter or third of the movie, we see how the two can just naturally work together, even if John Constantine is as drunk and high as he is, and they haven't really talked to each other in a few years. This would eventually lead up into the final battle where we're going to have Hecate / the Crone against our two heroes. And the Crone is going to be controlled by the Upside Down Man when he's in his own realm. That is, I'm not joking, called the Other Place. I like to think this will be very similar to the climax of Doctor Strange, where you have Dormammu sort of controlling / influencing Caecilius when he's battling Strange, Mordo, and Wong. Now, Constantine's drug use actually ends up being their saving grace, as he can think outside the box and form up some fun magical BS that would lead to them getting the upper hand in this fight. Now, the way that this actually helps them is by showing the weakness between the Crone and the Upside Down Man, this being their connection. So, to efficiently defeat them, the solution is to fully banish the Upside Down Man to his realm of, I'm not kidding, the Other Place. And this would sever their connection and would leave the Crone defeated. They do this, however, the side effect is that Hecate, as a result, also dies in this ending. And this, of course, leaves Zatanna very emotional and sad, because this is somebody that she looked up to, one of her all-time heroes from studying in the cult of the Cold Flame. And Constantine, in his own way, tries to console Zatanna at the end. And now, to round out 2023, we have our sequel to Shazam. We open up with a brief history of Mr. Mind and how he goes from Venus to exploring the galaxy and eventually coming to Earth. In his travels, we see him meeting Circe on Sorka after the events of Wonder Woman 3. And in these events, he gives her power. And this is enough power for her to quickly get off of Sorka and return to Earth. And she does this in return for helping Mr. Mind out in his schemes. We get a bit of catching up with the Marvel family and how they've been doing, and they suddenly start fighting Dr. Sivana. As Sivana had escaped from prison after we get the fun little post-credit scene in this movie naturally between Sivana and Mr. Mind, and how Mr. Mind offers him more power. In the same way he gives Circe power. Throughout the first half of the second act or so, the next portion of the movie, the Marvel family starts battling these magical heroes that we've seen in other movies, like Cheetah, Ma'alefa'ak, Sivana, and Circe. However, they quickly are able to be defeated and suddenly have no magical abilities of any kind. The Marvel family interrogate this fearsome foursome, if you will, and they all have one thing in common. They are visited by this little bug that was able to give them power. Now, around the same time, the climax would start to come into play, and this would be Mr. Mind absorbing all of their abilities and slowly start to physically grow and become a kaiju-like monster. Now, the way that Mr. Mind was able to do this was he slowly started giving them magic and giving them abilities. This is effectively his version of fattening them up before he eats them. Now, this would end with a showdown between this kaiju-sized Mr. Mind and the Marvel family, with Mr. Mind, of course, like any superhero movie, if you haven't caught by yet, being defeated and a wave of energy being spread out across the world, and this would eventually, in the post-credit scenes, be shown to give all these villains their abilities back. In another post-credit scene, we find out that the 7 deadly sins are related to Trigon. Now, to start off 2024, I have Suicide Squad 2. When Martian Manhunter comes to Earth, he is followed by beings of him as well, those being the White Martians. Creatures like Jean in powers and abilities, and they, however, blame Manhunter for the destruction of their planet and vow to kill him. This is because when the planet was destroyed, only 2 other people really left from the source of the damage, those being Ma'alefa'ak and Jean. The White Martians happen to see Jean and blame him for the destruction of the world. They do this by finding out where the telepathic energy is being used the most and start infiltrating governments like the United States, where Jean is living at the time. When one of the Martians is accidentally taken down, the disguised human body slowly reverts to that of a White Martian and is then dissected. Now, within the government, there is an attempt to neutralize anybody who could be an alien, and Amanda Waller and her Task Force X is seen as prime candidates to get the job done. This team would consist of, I'm going to read this off here, Deadshot, Harley Quinn, Killer Croc, Enchantress, El Diablo, Captain Boomerang, Katana, and being led of course, by Rick Flag. Jean, who is a reporter at this time, discovers this and tries to write a story on it, which of course then gets shut down by the government. Jean then reveals himself to them as Martian and that he can indeed help them take the Martians down because, well, they're of his people or a type of his people, similar to Homo sapien and Neanderthal, in the sense that both are humanoid but are different species. It's kind of weird. Waller is very against this because if Jean is truly Martian, then he could be that of the enemy as well, and this could be a clever attempt to also take down the world. Now, this then creates confusion because during this moment between Jean and Waller ends up showing slight hints of fear, and this starts to confuse the Suicide Squad as Waller is never afraid. It is eventually revealed that Waller is indeed dead and that this is actually Protex, the leader of the White Martians, come to Earth to destroy J'onn J'onzz for destroying Mars. Now, in the climax, we're going to have Jean and the Suicide Squad go up against Protex and the White Martian army, and eventually, of course, like I just said, villain defeated, hero wins, hero and villains beat the villain. And the movie would end with Jean walking up to Protex as he slowly starts to die and is able to convince Protex that Jean is indeed innocent in the destruction of Mars and that it was really Ma'alefa'ak who was the one who destroyed Mars. And then, of course, since Amanda Waller is dead, the Suicide Squad just disband. There's no one there to lead the team. There's no reason for them to stay together, and they all just go their separate ways. So, the next movie in my Phase 3 is one of my favorites, The Titans. Now, Dick Grayson, after leaving the team to go on his journey of self-discovery, which leads him to becoming Nightwing, the team is vulnerable without their leader. Trigon takes Raven in an attempt to go through his, power trip, and Silas Stone, after Raven is taken away, who is a bit more villainous in this incarnation, he is obsessed with the idea of removing the cybernetics from Victor as he feels guilty for turning him into the way he is and tries to bring his son back to normal. This leaves Starfire and Beast Boy as the only two left. They are not smart enough to track someone like Silas Stone. They are not powerful enough to defeat Trigon by themselves, and they cannot get a hold of Dick Grayson because he has severed himself from basically his entire past life in his journey of self-discovery. So the next best plan was to pick their battles and try to open up the Teen Titans for, new signees. And this only happens to be one new signee shortly before the events of the movie start, and that is Virgil Hawkins, Static Shock. The story really picks up when Dick meets Corey in Bloodhaven while he's on a mission, and Corey is able to fill in what has happened and the horrible events that have transpired after Dick Grayson had left the team in his journey to becoming Nightwing. After Dick is filled in, he goes off and grabs Tim, and the five, Dick Grayson, Tim Drake, Starfire, Beast Boy, and Static Shock, go on to save Cyborg. Now, shortly after saving Cyborg, the team, this again now consisting of Dick Grayson, Tim Drake, Starfire, Beast Boy, Static Shock, and Cyborg, recruit two more members, these being Wally West and Jackson Hyde, to go off and defeat Trigon and save Raven. Now, Trigon is an extremely powerful being, and despite getting the extra manpower, they simply are not powerful enough to defeat Trigon by himself. But what they can do is sever Trigon's hold on Raven, and Raven will then be able to imprison him eventually in that ruby that she would have in her head, as she hasn't really had that at any point in the story up to now. In the resolution, Tim then goes up to Dick and asks him, well, if you are going to be in Bloodhaven, how are you going to be leading the Titans? And Dick says, well, simply, I won't. You will. I brought you along so you can learn how to lead the Teen Titans when it's not my job anymore. So what ends up happening is Starfire and Beast Boy, being the hearts of the original Teen Titans, now adults, will be leading a team just simply called the Titans, whereas Tim Drake, along with Wally West and Aqualad and Static Shock, would be the new Teen Titans. And this would be a weird, X-Men to the Avengers, where the Titans would be the sister group to the Justice League of America, And the Titans would have a training program for their young heroes known as the Teen Titans. And then once heroes would graduate from the Teen Titan program, they would either join the Titans or the Justice League of America. So the adult team of the Titans would be Dick Grayson Nightwing, Starfire, Cyborg, Beast Boy, and Raven, whereas the younger Teen Titans would be Tim Drake, Aqualad, Kid Flash, and Static Shock. I would have one post-credit scene for this movie, and this would be Raven in her room in Titan's Tower, being approached by a man with a thick English accent, of course being John Constantine, and he is asking her for help with a certain situation. The next project in my DC Cinematic Universe is Green Lantern Krona. The Green Lantern of Sector 2814 dies of old age, and his ring is then sent off to find itself a new user. Since there has been recent success with human lanterns, the ring goes down to Earth and finds John Stewart, a U.S. Marine who was discharged after disobeying a direct order that would have killed innocents in the line of duty. Stewart is brought to Oa to train and become the next Green Lantern. During John's training, there happens to be other lanterns who are growing old at an accelerated rate and dying. Hal and Kilowog, concerned of this, go to the Guardians, and their best solution is the exiled Guardian, Krona. He was recently detected by some lanterns in the Dead Zone, a forbidden place to most of the universe due to an ancient threat. Stewart overhears this conversation and is later told to stay behind to complete his training while Hal, Kilowog, and a few other lanterns go off to investigate the Dead Zone. Stewart, using his military knowledge, is able to escape Oa and follow the other lanterns to find Krona in the Dead Zone. Once arriving, Krona is much more powerful than was previously described, and he quickly comments on the fact that they brought too few lanterns to be able to take him out. He begins to start siphoning life from a few of the nameless lanterns, as John Stewart is in complete shock at the new warfare he is witnessing. Hal and Kilowog quickly order retreats and are able to escape. Hal, John, Kilowog, and two other nameless lanterns. Immediately after returning to Oa, the three main lanterns, Kilowog, Jordan, and Stewart, all meet with the Guardians again, and it is concluded that Krona must be working with the being Nekron, and they had apparently worked out a deal that makes them both much more powerful. Stewart is scolded for leaving training early, but he is able to convince the Guardians that they're going to need all the help that they can get, and the Guardians do agree to forego his training for the moment, and if he's able to survive, that he'd be trained after this would be taken care of. After this regrouping session on Oa, Hal Jordan goes off to meet with his now girlfriend, Carol Ferris, and give her one final goodbye before going off with the rest of the Green Lantern Corps to defeat Krona. Carol is very distraught about this, and before she's able to tell Hal a big secret that she wants to tell him, Hal goes off to fight in this battle, which starts by Krona quickly getting the upper hand over the Lanterns. And right when Krona is about to win, he is hit by a massive bolt of pink energy. Hal and John look behind them and find that it's actually Carol. She is somehow surviving through the deep vacuum of space and is surrounded by a pink aura. She helps turn the tide in battle and helps take down Krona once and for all. And after the battle, while on Oa, she explains to Hal that her big secret that she tried to tell him is that she can be of service, and that she is that of power very similar to a Green Lantern. She's leader of a small group of lanterns powered up by crystals rather than rings, and they call themselves the Star Sapphires of Love. So, moving into 2025, I start off with my Black Adam movie. And Black Adam is a very interesting case. When I was in college, I was doing a creative writing course. And in said creative writing course, we had to write a 10-page short story. Since I was neck deep in writing this universe at the time, I decided that my story was going to be based off one of these fake movies. And I figured the best story that would fit this assignment would be my Black Adam story. So I put a link in the description where you should be able to read this original 10-page long version of my Black Adam story. And for the sake of this video, I will read a version that was cut down and summarizing that 10-page short story to kind of fit alongside the rest of these, movies in this phase. So if you would like to read a much more in-depth version of this movie, check out the link in the description. Teth Adam, his brother Amon, and Adriana Tomez, who is Teth's love, are all slaves in Kahndaq. The three return to their family. Teth and Amon's family took in Adriana, but when they enter their home, everyone is dead. Since they have literally nothing left for them in Kahndaq, they attempt to escape. During this escape, Teth gets wounded by Kahndakian guards, and Amon runs to his aid while Adriana is captured to be a maiden for the pharaoh. While Amon tries to help Teth to his feet, they see Adriana being taken away. But before they can start chasing her, they find themselves in a mysterious place, the Rock of Eternity. While in the Rock of Eternity, the two notice a group of figures standing in the shadows, one of which walks up to Amon and Teth and says that because of Amon's good deed, that he would like to bestow upon him the power of being his champion. Amon will only accept these powers as long as Teth would be healed. To do so, Teth would also have to be granted the abilities too. And Djimon Hounsou's wizard Shazam offers to oblige and give Teth the abilities as well. So the two eventually leave the Rock of Eternity, both with the powers of Shazam. Now, back in Kahndaq, the duo attempt to make a plan, or at least Amon does. Teth says that with their new abilities, they could just storm the castle as no one is powerful enough to stop them. They do this instead, and Amon is trying to keep Teth in some amount of control as he being Teth, is starting to really lose himself a little bit. They eventually find Adriana, and the two, Teth and Adriana, embrace as she thought he was dead and he thought she was going to be a slave for the rest of her life. Now the three once united again, Amon says that they could just fly away and live in peace and live on their own for the rest of their days, whereas Teth has other plans. Teth says that, well, we have the power, we can change things here and help everybody else. But Teth's plan to do this is by ruling in fear and having everybody submit to them as they have all the power now. Amon does not agree with this in the slightest, and the two end up having a face-off. Almost literally. Teth actually slices up Amon's face and leaves him partially blind by slicing out one of his eyes. In the state of shock, Amon eventually takes Adriana, and the two eventually run away, leaving Teth in the palace, surrounded by guards and the pharaoh. Teth then takes over Kahndaq by killing the pharaoh and using his power to intimidate the guards to obey him. The guards and Kahndakians dub him Black Adam after his suit color and his name. Teth uses this name to strike fear in the hearts of his enemies, and his first command of the guards is to track down Amon and Adriana. After some time searching, they are quietly brought back to the palace as to not stir up any unnecessary bloodshed. After trying peaceful negotiations, Adam then asks Adriana the simple question, "Do you still love me?" She says that she does not know, but will be with him if he were to just drop all his power and then run away with her and Amon. Adam contemplates the suggestion very briefly, but refuses to give up his power, as they could still live in the palace instead of living in fear of it. And Adriana is now confused at the state of her once love, and Amon steps in to tell Adam that he is completely out of line with this thinking. This argument leads into our climactic battle, which is a fight to the death between Teth and Amon. Amon sacrifices himself to try to kill Adam, however he fails and dies anyway. Adam returns to the palace and tries to take Adriana, and while this happens, they find themselves back in the Rock of Eternity. The wizard and Adam quickly get into a fight after a quick argument about Adam getting his power in the first place, and Adam is easily winning. However, in this fight, Adriana is hit in the crossfire, causing Adam to lose focus. This allows the wizard to banish him to a far off reach of the cosmos, and the wizard then tries to heal Adriana. Adriana will not wake up, however, and as respect to her, she is kept buried in the depths of the tombs of Kahndaq in a beautiful resting place. The wizard is able to leave some magic on her, as while she is in this massive coma, not dead, she will not age until she awakes, so that way once she does, she will be able to continue her life as normal as she can. In the post-credit scenes, we see Adam wake up deep into the cosmos many years later and begin searching for a way back to Earth, specifically for Adriana. The penultimate project in my Phase 3 is Nightwing 2. Mark Desmond, a chemist working for Wayne Enterprises, is working on a project to save his brother Roland. When Nightwing beat him up in a battle in the events of Nightwing 1, he was brought to Mark in an attempt to save his life. He works with a good heart, this being Mark, and was forced to help him by some members of the mob that Roland was employed with. Shortly after the events of Titans, Dick Grayson returns to Bloodhaven after leaving the Teen Titans in the hands of Tim Drake. Dick goes to the bar where he works, and while he is working there and serving his guests, a woman bursts into the building, and she is completely in costume, fully armed with various weapons, and is wearing a mask. She explains that she is looking for a man who she is supposed to turn in for a reward, who was supposed to be here. Dick calmly informs her that there is no such man here, and politely asks her to leave. After ignoring him for a while, very much like the scene in Deadpool where Ajax and Angel come in to interrogate Weasel and the rest of Sister Margaret's, bar, whatever it was called. She interrogates various guests, including Dick, and then eventually leaves. Dick leaves a tracker on her and finds out that she is going to an embassy. She goes there to meet a man by the name of Bivens. This is her butler, and her name is revealed to be Lady Vic. The man she is looking for is Marin, a mob boss who had never paid her for a hit. Eventually, we see Nightwing and Lady Vic meet up for a battle, and Vic wonders who he is while Nightwing is trying to let her know that she won't find who she is looking for. After some amount of light flirting, similar to Batman and Catwoman, the two do end up fighting on a rooftop. This rooftop just so happens to be the building where Mark Desmond is working on his brother, and the two crash through the window. Chemicals are knocked over all over the place, and they land on Roland's body, causing him to convulse and grow exponentially. Now, quickly, Roland wakes up and begins to freak out, which causes him to accidentally hit and kill his brother instantly. He looks over and sees his brother's lifeless body sitting on the floor, and Lady Vic and Nightwing fighting off in the distance on the same room. Putting the dots together, Roland believes this to be their fault. After Roland starts causing mayhem to try to kill Nightwing and Vic, Nightwing thinks quickly and drops a smoke pellet to use that and get away and fight another day. Vic starts talking to Roland and tries to get him on her side, saying that the other man's name was Nightwing and he had engaged her in the battle, and that he is the true cause of his new form and the death of his brother. Of course, none of this is true, as Lady Vic, of course, engaged Nightwing in that fight. The two villains come up with a plan that involves Roland taking over his old mob that used to be owned by Tony Zuko, and Vic gets rewarded for keeping Nightwing away and being his right-hand woman. Nightwing is on top of the building and sees that they have teamed up. Knowing he is unable to defeat them on his own, he goes to Alfred for help, and Alfred hooks him up with some tech that is very similar to that of what Batman had in The Dark Knight. A visor that has that kind of camera technology that allows Alfred to see whatever Dick Grayson is able to see, as well as having cameras that stick to walls. And with this added recon and Dick's stealth skills, he's able to start the climactic battles between him and Lady Vic and him and Blockbuster. He first lures out Lady Vic and takes her on one, and then leads up to the final battle between him and Blockbuster. Using his agility and speed, he is able to take him down and put him behind bars alongside Lady Vic. And so rounding out my Phase 3, I have Justice League Dark. And this movie opens up with what seems like a chase. We see June Moon clutching her head and her body as she sprints through a Louisianian bayou towards a shady individual. We only ever see June as she asks if the mysterious individual could help her. With a nonverbal affirmation, we hear some quiet, indistinct mumbling from this mysterious stranger. Then we see as Moon and Enchantress are separated from each other. Enchantress quickly runs away, and June begins to try to live a normal life. This is all until Enchantress starts to go crazy and realize that she needs a human host if she plans to live much longer. She finds innocent women and attempts to steal their life force, though this just kills the victims and Enchantress gets nothing. She then realizes that she needs June Moon. During this rampage, Madame Xanadu begins to investigate and discover that Enchantress's mission before she barely escapes with her life. To throw off Enchantress, Xanadu begins to create duplicates of June Moon across the world. These duplicates are seen by June on the news, and they're all dying horrible deaths that are caused by Enchantress, and believes that there is potential that Enchantress could still be a part of her. And so she decides to go and visit the dead man. And she remembers he was a candidate for the Suicide Squad, although Amanda Waller was never able to find a way to control him, so he was left to roam the world free. The Justice League are eventually called in to battle the Enchantress as she started destroying cities and is fed up with the games, referring to all the duplicates. The JLA are easily dispatched by Enchantress as they are not nearly powerful enough to handle her magic. This confirms to Xanadu that a new team would need to be formed that could defeat the Enchantress, so she begins to build a team that starts with Shade the Changing Man and instructs them to meet her at the House of Mystery. Meanwhile, Constantine and Zatanna, that are still working together, receive a message from Martian Manhunter to meet them at the Hall of Justice to educate the League on magic after their battle with the Enchantress. The heroes conclude that the League does not have the capability to defeat someone like the Enchantress, even if Constantine and Zatanna would join them. And so, to defeat her, they also come up with the idea that they're going to need some help. At some point in this conversation, Zatanna is pulled out of nowhere in through this portal, which is caused by Shade the Changing Man, and Constantine is left alone with the Justice League. This would be a very good opportunity for a witty one-liner by Constantine. Constantine is then directed by Batman that he should contact Nightwing and the Titans and see if Raven could help him, as she is a human-demon hybrid, and she should be able to help him and Zatanna take on the Enchantress. When June meets with Deadman, she asks him to possess her to see if Enchantress is still somehow inside of her. Deadman obliges and confirms to June that Enchantress is indeed not a part of her, and the two would then get a knock at the door. This would actually end up being Enchantress, who is relieved to finally have found the real June. Deadman would do the best he can to protect her, but is thrown off when Shade the Changing Man and Zatanna burst into the room, and the three trip over each other's feet, so to speak, and Enchantress is able to run away with June. The three then compare to each other's notes and return to contact Madame Xanadu at the House of Mystery. Constantine and Raven then have the scene where Constantine recruits her, like we see in the end of the Titans movie, and they go on to track where Enchantress is with Raven's empathetic powers. And so they head towards the source of that power. This is after she takes June. Constantine and Raven, still unsure of Zatanna's whereabouts, and without time to properly search for her before the events of the climax, begin said climax. They enter a spooky shack in a Louisianan bayou where June is being held by Enchantress. All the two are capable of doing is to find June and perform a protection circle where neither Enchantress could hurt them, but they can't hurt Enchantress. This is just to buy time, and hopefully Zatanna is able to show up. Constantine begins talking to June, and June explains what Enchantress is after. Enchantress wants to take June's life force, as she believes it is only June's life force that would allow Enchantress to be able to properly live on her own without any sort of human host. And then she would try to pervert humanity and the Earth into her own dominion and slaves. Very similar to her goals in Suicide Squad's 2016. Constantine inquires why this has never happened before, and June explains that it was because of her that she was able to keep the Enchantress at bay as well as she was. But it nearly drove her crazy. Constantine replies, detailing that she then really has two options. Live by herself for the rest of her life, which would be until Enchantress destroys the world, or re-merge with Enchantress and continue to hold her at bay at the cost of her own freedom and or sanity. Raven then empathizes with June, explaining that in her situation with Trigon, she is really forced to do the same thing or else he would conquer Earth through her. Zatanna, Shade, and Deadman then arrive on the scene and help pull the three outside of danger from inside the shack. The team then begins to attempt to fight the Enchantress, although the Enchantress puts a magical rope around June's neck, giving them the ultimatum that if they want to kill her, they would also have to kill June, and all their effort would be in vain. June then takes control of the situation by forcibly re-merging herself with the Enchantress, and after all this happens, June is lying on the ground unconscious. Deadman confirms to the team that she is alive, and the Enchantress is indeed inside of her. Then Shade teleports them all back to the House of Mystery to help June. Once she awakes, Deadman confirms to her that the Enchantress and her are one once again. Raven then consoles June in her decision, and the two bond over their similar fates. Constantine then offers her a magical concoction that could help temporarily take the edge off if the insanity were to return. Just as it seems all is well, June recognizes Xanadu as the mysterious individual from the beginning of the movie, and it is revealed that Xanadu was the cause of all of this in the first place. The team was obviously upset about this revelation and decided that they should all go their separate ways and focus on helping people on their own way once again. Now, in the post-credits scene, the team would all get nightmares, except for Deadman, who gets a vision because Deadman doesn't sleep. about an impending doom, about something about the wrath of God. And this would force the team to come back together and try to prepare for an impending doom. I'll let you all guess on what this would lead to. Thank you all for watching. Believe me when I say I do not know how many hours I've put into making this universe, let alone how many hours in the past handful of weeks. I still continue to work on this universe, and as long as you guys enjoy listening to these ideas, I am very happy making more. So if you want to see more, go ahead and click that like button and subscribe. And as always, have a very lovely